I have no clue.
Well, it's weird
That's
because it's like it's the middle of the day for people, and on a Sunday in Ireland, they shouldn't have anything to do.
lying in bed. God.
Ah,
Ooh.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Ads are rolling.
Okay,
Clicking
well, we're
on visit
flying anyway.
advertiser.
Right. Well, she's working anyway. That's the main thing. It's that lovely wallpaper that you love, Rachel.
Oh God, AI. You need to stop using that. You
That's
can do
not. That's
better.
not. That's not AI. That's not AI. I'm getting
Oh,
accused for
it's
AI
not.
even when it's not. Yeah, yeah. Believe it or not, that one's not actually AI. Now it's turned into a witch hunt because I was using another photo this week as well, and somebody's like, "Oh, your videos are great, but you're always using AI." And I was like, "That one's not AI. It's just that AI has gotten so good, and I've got so good at using AI that now when I use a real photo, you think it's AI." Which, to be fair, some of my shirts this week that I was using AI look really good as well. Well, that's
Ah,
flying.
we've got a good morning, Cat Soul. Good morning, Cat.
Oh, you can see the comments. I can't.
I
Uh,
can. Thank you for joining us.
1 second. Where did I put my? Oh, is it my
Look
phone?
at us all there on the screen together. Oh, fantastic. Okay.
You can hear us, Skinny.
Yes, sound check since you are only person, Cat, thus far.
Sound check. 1 2 1 2. I can't.
Yeah. We sound good to us.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Give us one very quick moment. I'll just go and grab my phone. I think my phone's actually in the other room. And what else do I need? Oh, and just get some water. Give us one moment while people start to fill up the room.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have some exciting things to discuss today. Yeah, so Kat, where are you in the all good? Excellent. Where are you in the world? Philip and I are over here in Eastern Asia, very close to each other, Japan and Korea.
Me and my skinny legs. Right. Phone was actually next to me. I stood up and it was on my chair thing. I was like, oh, right.
That seems right somehow.
I know, right?
Oh,
Um,
maybe make that stop.
right, let me head over to. I'll turn off my notifications so this isn't banging while I'm talking away. Bum, bum, bum. The worst thing is when I have notifications on while I'm trying to sleep, and suddenly one of my friends over in Ireland is like, "Bow, bow, bow, bow. Have you heard? Have you heard? Have you heard?" No, I haven't. Time for sleep.
That's right. No, I haven't. Yeah, when Korea had that very brief period of martial law, I
Oh,
awoke the next morning to all these concerned messages and I had no idea what they're talking about. Are there tanks in the streets? Are people shooting? Are you safe? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I checked the news and apparently martial law lasted for about 2 hours before the Korean parliament, got past the soldiers and overruled it and restored democracy. It was great. It was the
oh.
best thing ever for me.
Wild. And you slept through the whole thing.
I slept through the whole thing.
Mm.
Yep.
It's not every day you get to sleep through martial law.
I did. I missed it. I missed the 2 hours that it apparently had a great effect on society because I slept. It was so bad that I slept right through it. Yeah.
Jesus. What are you making
Yeah.
there?
I don't know if you saw the short I rolled out on my new kerchief. This is my new kerchief veil
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, this is it's almost done. It's almost done. All of this gauzy veil stuff is going to get worn over top of one of those pointed bonnets, things people wrongly call a hennin.
Hmm.
Be super sexy and tantalizing.
I seen as well you got 7,000 views earlier. I was like,
Oh
what?
yeah, that getting that what? Oh, but let me tell you, my condottiero wanted to go and kill some people because of course when you stream to a wider audience, you get a lot more trolls and some really nasty ones. And you can imagine that on a getting dressed video, you're going to get a particularly large percentage of, not great people.
Yeah.
So, but 22 new subscribers in 45 minutes. Can't complain about that.
No, you cannot. Okay, so that's going to be there for the whole thing, is it? I have this thing vanishing up in the room. Can I move this?
Yeah, cat exactly. Strength of the people. Yeah, it was great. Let me tell you, being here in Korea, it's just been good for my soul.
We'll get it a wee bit started because I can't be up all night now talking about. I've got a class
Yep.
over on Patreon at what was it? My time, 5 a.m. Well, it's 6 a.m.
What?
Technically speaking, I have to get back up
Why?
because this is when Irish people are going to bed. So just before they go to bed, they come to my class. But it
They
ends up
want they want they want good night stories about Irish
that's
medieval
it.
history. That seems
That's
like
it.
a good recipe for a nightmare.
What? Just because people get boiled alive and hung, drawn, and quartered?
Something
What?
like that. Yeah. I mean, medieval history is not usually the way I recommend people go to sleep. It's,
Mm.
you know, fantasy stories. That's a good way to go to sleep.
Oh, hi. Hi. He is friends with Michael. Yes. Yeah. Well, it depends which Michael you're talking about. If you're talking about that one's in Clans and Dynasty, definitely not. He deserves to be hung, drawn, and quartered for being an Ulster man.
Oh, Elizabeth, my one of my apprentices is on. Elizabeth, thank you for joining us. Yeah,
Yes.
I mentioned on all the live streams today that I would be here, so it's nice
Oh,
to see
nice.
some people actually jumping over.
Oh, thank you. What a saint. Rachel, you're an absolute saint. Advertising it like no tomorrow. Ah,
Okay, well, it is May. It is the beginning of May. It is the, as they say in the Middle Ages in many parts of Europe, the lusty month of May now is the Maying.
mm,
So yeah, we should jump into that. So it's
yeah.
funny, I was thinking about this because you and I live here in Eastern Asia, and I don't know about Japan, but here in Korea, we have Buddha's birthday here at the beginning of the month, and that really kind of highlights the idea that peoples across the world at roughly this latitude, right, all kind of celebrate the beginning of May in some way or another, whether
Mm,
it's the secular celebration or it's a more religious rite. Like they always find an excuse to put some kind of celebration right about now.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting because it's this week that the Japanese as well have all their bank holidays and stuff off. You kind of got me off guard there with the Eastern holidays. I suddenly went, oh wait, actually, how much do I know? Yuki's off working right now, so I'm like, oh god, just got me off guard. I literally have a spiel ready for Ireland and nothing in what's happening in Okinawa around me. I know that they have the week off anyway for celebrations and stuff, and they'll go up into the mountains to celebrate their what is it, their local religions and stuff. That's what I know anyway.
Right? Yeah, it's like it's every place. It's something about this point in the season, roughly this latitude, because people in Thailand don't care. They're like, oh, it's May.
Mm,
Things are still green. They've been green all year.
yeah,
Um,
that's a good
you
point
know,
actually.
people at these latitudes, for us, it's a time of renewal and rebirth.
Mm.
Maybe not so much in Okinawa. It
Yeah,
doesn't really get very
the,
brown in Okinawa, does it?
no, it stays nice and green. To be honest with you, the only massive change is the humidity level. It suddenly gets really sticky. Like this is the point. Like I'm sticky right now. Like so this is the point onwards that everything just gets so sticky. So there is a change. Like it goes from like normal to suddenly once, and you can tell it's the 1st of May when suddenly everything gets very humid, and then suddenly gets
Right.
everything gets so sticky around me. So that's to the point where I'm just like, okay, I guess it's May Day.
So clearly not a cause for celebration in the tropical parts of the world, but for those of
No.
us up in the temperate parts, things are springing back to life instead of just getting hot and humid. Now
Aye.
here in the land of Joseon, it gets hot and humid in about June is when it really starts, and then by August you're just ready to quit life.
Yeah. No, literally by the time it gets to June here, I'm just like the sun. Like, oh, Yuki will be like talking. I remember last summer it was June, and we were at the dinner table, and I remember Yuki just talking and talking about having a stroke, and I was there, my brain melted, going, "Oh yeah, it's fascinating, Yuki." You know? Oh, I was so demented by the heat, like it was wild.
But you're
I
from
was
Ireland. You're not meant for this, my friend.
really
This
not,
is
really not.
this is
Like
literally not in your blood.
I was so chubby and fat before I came over to Okinawa, and now I'm so skinny. Like, look, I skinny chicken legs and everything on me. Like, this is not natural for me. Like, I was there. I was there this morning. My brother is off to a big wedding at Clontarf Castle this morning, and I was telling him, God, I would kill for a good old what was it, Irish breakfast and full Irish dinner and stuff. And my brother's there taking pictures of the most delicious Irish breakfast I've ever seen up in Clontarf Castle, and I'm like, I hate you. You do know that.
Yeah, that's something that only a loving brother could do, really.
Chalk it
I
down,
mean,
chalk it down. It's exactly what he's like. So anyway, we're covering Beltane today, the medieval Gaelic May festival, making of the summer, and also we're going to be covering festival rituals, sacred sites, and other roles, and Christianization and all that kind of stuff, with yourself and myself today. So we're not just covering Ireland today. I'll be doing a bit of Ireland today, all right. But Rachel will also be covering May festivals throughout all of Europe. So we'll be busy until eventually around, hopefully we'll be finished around 10ish. So I can go to bed early. We'll see anyway.
yeah.
So we'll pop over to
Beltane, the fire, the festival of fire, just kind of, everywhere in a lot of places in Europe, their fire is part of the May Day celebration, but not everywhere. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's interesting how, but humans, I feel like humans are always looking for an excuse to set things on fire. Like since we figured out that we could control fire, we've been finding excuses to do it.
Oh,
It's
stop. That was literally all I did as a teenager. It was called bushing, but I would always set up a fire, and because I'm still am addicted to it. Every single time there's a what was it, a medieval festival on the go, there I am, the first one next to setting up the campfire and a few cans, like love it, like you know.
yeah,
Nothing like it.
there is something nice about the smell of a good fire, as long as you're not inhaling the smoke full on.
You stop, it goes into your eyeballs.
Yeah,
Hello,
right.
I don't need eyes.
No, I don't need eyes and I don't need to breathe, and it's okay if my lungs turn black. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. Oh, perfectly fine. So we'll get
So,
started anyway.
yeah, medieval May Day in general. So, I chose this picture on purpose because this is a fish market, right?
Mm,
So, what a lot of people don't realize is that the medieval calendar, especially, is very, very Christian. And so, before leading up to May, what most people don't think about modernly, because most of us don't live this way anymore,
mm.
is that it's the season of Lent, right? You've got 40 days of fasting. And I don't mean just going without meat, I mean eating little, but also in the medieval world, fasting included any kind of amorous activities of a physical nature, shall we say.
Oh, I.
So you have pent up passions after the 40 days of Lent and the Easter celebrations, and there's a whole bunch of ember days, which are the days of fasting that fall on the church calendar as it was known back then, that also follow Easter. So it's not just that, oh, Easter's here, we can feast, we can go back to our old activities. No, no, no. There's still all these other days that come along, right?
Mm.
So by the time the weather finally gets nice and things are turning green come right about May 1st, everyone they're all pent up. They've
Yeah.
been inside probably for a good part of the time. They haven't gotten to flirt and delight in each other's company in quite the same way. And so there's all of this pent up everything.
Yeah.
All the passions are pent up.
Mm.
So that is kind of the underlying reason why this all comes about, seems to happen in May. Like this all comes to a head in May. Also, the earth is springing, life is renewing, and medieval people were apparently absolutely conscious of spring as a season. It's not just like this is us modern people reflecting back on the Middle Ages. No, there's this text called the Secreta Secretorum, written by pseudo Aristotle back in the 12th century, and it was attributed to Aristotle. It's not, so I call it pseudo Aristotle.
Mm.
And basically, he writes this whole long passage about spring, and he talks about life coming back, water flowing again, the sap rising, the branches coming forth with leaves, the flowers blooming, the bees start buzzing again, right? So medieval people were very aware of the turning of the seasons at more than just a practical level. Like they felt it to their core, and probably more than we do because they were living closer to nature than we were. When things got cold in medieval Europe, you might have had a fireplace if you were lucky, but your castle still got coldish, right?
Mm.
Um, if things got hot, actually, they're pretty good about the heat. But this means that they felt the change of the seasons without climate control and central heating and all of that much more than we do now, for the most part,
Oh, the joys.
right?
But
So
like this is why I kind of like I don't know why, but cranogs, especially when you put the heat, get the fire going in the middle, they're like ovens or something. They get so hot, like, and I've been to a nice little roundhouse in the middle of the winter, and they still get so hot inside of them. So I definitely prefer the nice warmth of a nice little cranog and stuff. Maybe it's the same in a castle once you get proper fire up and running and stuff. Especially as you were saying before with the nice little covers on the walls and stuff. Maybe that could keep in enough heat.
yeah, so the difference is, of course, those roundhouses are small,
Mm. Oh,
and
well, yeah, that's a good
they
point.
don't have they they don't have cathedrals, right? But castles have super high ceilings, and trying to heat that entire space, it's just not on. If you look at pictures of medieval people sitting inside castles
Mm.
in winter, you'll notice they're wearing a lot of layers, and the women are often wearing an extra garment to cover their décolleté,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So you can tell they're sitting by the fire and they're still wearing this thing that covers basically up to their neck, and then they've got heavy headdresses on with heavy velvet veiling basically. So it wasn't cold like if you go to a castle now that's
Mm,
not
mm,
heated and no longer has its plaster on that. Yeah, they're cold and they're drafty, but it also wasn't exactly toasty warm.
mm, mm,
So
mm.
um, yeah,
That
the
sounds
round
very
houses were
different.
actually the smaller houses were actually much easier to keep warm because of
Yeah.
that.
Ah.
Also, if you bring the animals in, they're like little portable heaters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, well, that's true as well. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I'll just slightly move on to your next little picture
yeah,
here. You had a nice little green knight here. Um,
yeah. Yeah, so May is like there's two kinds of Maying,
mm, mm, mm.
right? So in the rest, I'd be interested if this is true in Ireland. Across all of Europe outside of Ireland, I specifically tried to keep myself as uninformed about Ireland as possible because I wanted to be pleasantly surprised by information.
Mm,
So throughout, I looked at England, I looked in Wales, I looked at France, I looked at Burgundy, I looked in the various parts of what are now Germany, German speaking. I looked into Bohemia, I looked into Italy, I looked into Spain.
mm,
And all of these places share two levels of what's called maying. It's actually a verb. In English, in 15th century English, it is a verb.
mm,
Now is the month of Maying. It is an action, it is an activity. And there's two levels. There's the courtly level, and then there's the popular level.
mm.
And the popular level is very hard to document because they were not literate. They, for the most part, it's not, they weren't as literate. They didn't have as much time to write. Actually, many peasants were literate, especially the ones who had farms that were very successful. They needed to keep records and all that.
Mm.
But that didn't mean they had time to just sit around and write poetry about what they did in May.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the nobility are looking, they have this weird relationship with the peasants, right? They acknowledge that they need them to live. They kind of admire them for their freedom of life, but also there's a snobbery about it, right? Oh,
Mm.
well, those peasants in the field doing their dirty things. We have a better way about it. So most of what we know about May practices actually what we know instead of all this bullshit mythology that's floating around that people think they know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the records that we have, most of the actual documentation is about what the aristocrats, what the upper crust are doing.
Mm.
And that makes sense. Thankfully, occasionally a preacher comes along who gets his nose completely out of joint about whatever the peasants are doing, and then they write a diatribe about the horrible, horrible things that the common people are doing out in the field. So, at the court level, May Day practices all across Europe have this have a sexual overtone. Absolutely, May is
Mm.
the month of romance,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it really is. It's like Valentine's Day a little bit, but
Mm.
May is the
Mm,
month of
mm, mm,
romance in
mm.
the medieval calendar.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not that the courtiers are going into the woods and just having, disporting, but the peasants are.
Mm.
And we know that because we have, priests or especially by the 16th century, let me tell you, the Protestants, they anything that's associated with the Catholic Church, they call pagan,
Mm,
and they refer to automatically as being, sinful and devilish and evil and all that.
mm,
But one of the, amongst the courtly set, one of the common themes outside of Italy not so much, but outside of Italy, green was the color of the Maying.
mm,
And
mm,
so if you see illuminations of someone wearing all green with green barding, barding is the horse tack here, the pretty strappy horse tack that doesn't really serve a function. He's got a leafy wreath on and he's carrying a hawk. So hawking and wearing green and going out into nature were all big components of a courtly Maying. So anytime you see a depiction like this, I bet you 9 times out of 10 or more, it's probably going to be a depiction of May, of the season of May.
that's very interesting. To be honest with you, the only link I can think of is the Arthurian legends and how that would link back to the because there's a lot of comparisons with the
Mm.
Green Knight and the fin cycle and decapitation and all that kind of stuff because this is at May, as I was saying earlier to yourself, when it was just us two. May in Ireland is connected to the cattle raiding, and therefore it's connected to that whole warrior culture. But that's the only reference I can think of when it comes down to the green. The color is the Green Knight, and I think that's kind of poor in many ways to what
Right,
you're
right. And of
looking
course,
for.
the tale of the Green Knight takes place. It's an Advent story.
Yeah,
um,
you
Advent
nearly
at King
got me there.
Arthur's court. Yeah, but even still, I mean, you're not wrong. Like a lot of the Arthurian legend tales, those stories have this tension between the civilization of Camelot and the
Mm,
court and the wilderness that is the forest where all of their adventures actually happen,
mm,
right? Very very few of their adventures happen in a castle. And
mm.
not there are some, but the preponderance of them happen out in the woods when they encounter a random knight or a random lady who's probably dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
So that certainly does kind of fall in with the idea of going out into nature during May.
Mm, mm, mm,
And that seems to be a common theme everywhere in Europe, is that this idea that you leave your civilized space, the
mm.
court, in these cases specifically that I'm talking about, and as a group, the safety in numbers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because the medieval forests are actually dangerous places. You go out to the forest and you bring greenery back with you to court, and then you decorate the interior space with the fresh green from wilderness. So there's this combining the civilization, the refinement of civilization with the wilderness of a freshly sprung nature.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, that part of the renew and rebirth, you see, yeah, we definitely see that in Ireland as well, and
Mm.
the whole safety in numbers. Because in Ireland, I'll probably cover it in a wee bit now. Is the fact that people have this idea of the fairy folk and friendly and happy God people and this happy go lucky energy. But in Ireland, I couldn't find any, and it's so strange because I'm not aiming to be offensive to anyone here who does study neo-paganism or anything, but I noticed a lot of neo-pagans are like, oh, bring in the fresh, good energy. But the amount of warnings I had from the past when I was going through all this stuff is like, no, 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 outside has loads of negative energy. Close the door, lock it away, stay inside. And I think, to be honest with you, and this is only an assumption of mine, I think the world being a dangerous place is because this is the start of cattle raiding season, and therefore you have all these bandits just kicking around the countryside, causing a nuisance. And I do wonder if
Right.
this is a start as well of the warring season in France and England. Would France and England have the same kind of feeling as well of, oh geez, lock the door, stay inside, don't let a bandit get inside?
Well, God, especially in the 15th century, right?
Mm,
France is ravaged by the Hundred Years' War.
yeah.
So it's absolutely not a time you want to be outside of the walls, as it were.
Mm,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah, for certain. And it's the there a lot of people want to trace a lot of these traditions like in this pure linear line from ancient Celtic practices. And by ancient Celts, I don't mean Irish Celtic. I mean like the Celts in Europe,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like they want to trace this line from ancient Celts in Europe all the way through to present day practices. And I wasn't able to find that kind of clear, I wasn't able to find documentation for that line. For a lot of these practices seem to actually have been invented in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's only so many ways that people can celebrate as humans.
Yeah.
There's the limit to what we can do with our bodies. Physics kind of limits what we can do with our environment and our space. So just because someone is doing something at the same time as a previous people did the thing doesn't mean they're actually directly connected.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I definitely agree. Do you want me to pop on to the next slide there?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
and by the way,
absolutely.
for people jumping in and stuff, hello, how are you keeping? I hope everyone's doing well. And
Yeah.
ooh, now this one's an interesting one. It seems very similar to the last photo you had.
Yeah, so again, we've got this is from a book of hours, and it's from the May entry. And I just wanted, to provide some visuals about talking about the hawking and the hunting. Again, we've got someone hawking, and if we go to the most famous Maying scene ever in the history of the world is the one with the Jean de Berry's Très Belle Heure is the one with the hunting party. It's probably under France, I expect. If you just want to jump to there, that's fine.
Oh, the next one is up.
No, keep going.
No,
Skulk
this,
Nunner, that's fun. No,
no,
the one with all the beautiful people on horses. It's like one of the most famous illuminations in the history
this
of
one.
the world. No,
Oh,
keep going.
we'll find out eventually. Oh, that one?
That one,
Aha,
yes.
right.
Okay. Yeah. So this is most people don't necessarily realize this is a depiction of the Maying in the court of Jean de Berry, who was a royal peer of France, right? And the thing here is this is a party of men and women. Hawking was considered an acceptable activity, an acceptable form of hunting for women, because it involved a hawk doing most of the work, right? And so it wasn't rough, it wasn't dirty, it didn't involve you chasing down a boar and trying to cut its throat while it tries to cut your stomach open, right? So it's a very acceptable form of hunting for ladies, and it is hawking is absolutely tied in with May, because now there's things to hunt with your hawk, right? Whereas before that, most creatures were either hibernating or close to. So May, everything is waking up again, and now you can take your hawk out and go get yourself some fresh everything, and they didn't even just use hawks. They had very strange hunting birds in medieval France. They also used cranes, like they had trained cranes. Um, yeah, they had some very different kinds of birds
Yeah.
for hunting than we might think of. But yeah, so this is you're going to see often in May, you're going to read about men and women going out and hunting via falconry. Not, it's not women with bows and arrows, bow hunting. That's a lovely image, but that's not what it was. Yeah. Okay, we can go back to wherever we were in the
We have to
presentation.
fly
I just wanted to,
all the way back up
yeah.
again. Bum, bum, bum. I see Wicked Moon is up in Clare. I was down in Mallow. Last time I was up in Clare was
Welcome, Wiccan
2015.
Moon. Thank you for joining us.
I'll fly back over here. There we go.
Yeah.
So, can you explain this one?
Right. So I was talking about this. This is illustrating the idea that before before May is the Lenten season, right? And those are the nuns there on the right. They are in the midst of Lent. They are in a period of Lenten fasting. They, while they're even eating what little they're allowed to eat, the bread and water that they eat during Lent, there is a nun who's actually sermonizing at them to make sure that their meal is extra penitential. So by contrast, come May is therefore the release of all of that pent up. And the nuns had a different way of releasing that kind of pent up frustration. And
Okay.
that might make an interesting discussion at a later point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
But so that image there from the Roman de la Rose, the Romance of the Rose, was the bestseller of the later Middle Ages. immensely popular. There are copies of it in all sorts of languages all across Europe from the 14th and 15th century. And it's this allegorical dream vision about love, and love is actually like personified.
Mm,
And May is part, because May is so tied in with the lusty month of May,
mm.
that in the Roman de la Rose it's set during May, and it's set in this garden and then out in the forest. And so yeah, these two lovers are, you'll notice the rabbits, a sign of
How fitting.
fecundity, right? And so that really, this illustrates, they're, and look, notice they're out in the forest, right? There are
Mm,
trees all around them. This is not in the civilized world within the court. This is within in the world without of the court. And at
ah,
about the same time, this is about the time when the Robin Hood legends are starting to really take off also as popular reading. And they took off, even though we associate them now heavily with England, they were vastly popular in France, and more popular in France
mm.
almost.
Really? It's
And
wild.
yeah, and so with in the time of the Maying, actually, then in a lot of these May poems, we have so many poems from the 14th and 15th century about the Maying, so
Mm,
many. And there's always this contrast between the Maying of the court, because the idea is that the court goes out and then they go back to the castle and they have a feast.
mm.
But Robin and Marian are in the forest having this free love, untethered by the conventions of court, completely liberified. Wow, that is definitely liberated, completely liberated from those tensions. And there is a certain longing, even amongst the courtiers, amongst these noble, these aristocrats, for what they have obviously idealized as the great life of outlaws in the forest. Because we all know how wonderful it was to be an outlaw in medieval Europe, scarred and branded, probably missing a hand. I mean, it was
Yeah,
good. It was a good
an eye
time
or two.
living in the woods. Yeah.
The
So,
joys.
but that the reality, we're not talking about the reality, right? This is this fantasy life that they imagined it must be like to be Robin and Marian. So in a lot of the poems, there are references made, literally, like not just they talk about going and visiting Robin and Marian in their perfect forest picnic,
Mm.
and trying to please the lady with their own little sonnets or lines or rhymes or whatever. And the lady in this case is actually Marian.
Uh,
So yeah, so that all ties into this surgence of the Roman de la Rose, and of course the Romance of the Rose. Even though we use the word romance like it means love, and the Roman de la Rose is about love, that's just a coincidence. Romance just meant basically a novel,
mm, mm.
sort of story that was not, it wasn't a lecture, it wasn't a sermon, etc. It's a fiction basically.
Yeah, yeah. And I assume Robin Hood is still a noble in this as well, is he? A former noble?
No,
No, he
no, he is
wasn't.
not. No,
Ah.
not in the medieval. He's, well, it depends, right? So, there's like with any folk hero,
Mm.
there's different versions of his
Yeah,
origin,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he's not usually treated as a fallen nobleman. He's just kind of,
Ah.
he's an outlaw.
Really? So he's okay, okay, okay. Because I thought that's
Yeah.
where I was assuming there, and I was going to apply. Oh well, I suppose that's why the rich look up to him because he's a noble playing an outlaw. No, he's always been a bandit. Oh,
Yeah,
the more you
he's a
know.
bandit. No, I mean, it depends on the author actually writing the story down.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually had a friend who did her master's degree, her English master's degree on the medieval Robin Hood cycles,
Mm, mm.
because there's so many.
Yeah.
And there's a definite evolution over the centuries of the Middle Ages of his tale,
Yeah.
sort of like there is with the Arthurian legends,
Yeah.
right?
It's very true.
By the time Thomas Mallory comes along, it's basically nothing but action tale with almost no actual interaction or character development.
Yeah. Yeah, and now you've got all these movies that what was it the 2020 what was it the 2015 version of Arthur and stuff, and it's just like, oh no, where have we gone? I seen one version as well where Arthur, what was it? There was an archer or somebody, and the archer was using his bow and arrow like a machine gun and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, what am I watching? Like, what has King Arthur gotten
Yeah,
to? Bring me back to the
yeah, it's
90s, like. Right.
yeah, people always ask me if I've watched such and such a movie or show? And invariably, my answer is no. First up,
Yeah.
I can't get past the bad clothing. But the second they turn it into a steampunk, something set in the 12th century into a steampunk scenario, I'm out.
I don't understand it because living historians are getting easier and easier to get a hold of. And yet these movies, these Hollywood movies, are getting worse and worse. Don't get me wrong, the
Getting worse.
documentaries are getting better though. I've seen the recent documentaries that
Yeah.
History Hit have put on, and anyone connected to History Hit in Ireland and stuff have been putting on some amazing documentaries lately because they have connections with reenactors and living historians.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So I think History Hit is definitely doing just an exceptionally good job. I seen their latest one on Viking to Norman, and amazing reenactors. They had the reenactors on from Volan Festival on from it, and geez, amazing documentary. So I think documentary wise, especially to do with History Hit, they've definitely improved. But Hollywood wise, oh no, like it's gotten
Yeah,
worse.
it's really weird, right? Like it's like we can't have both. We
Yeah.
we either have terrible documentaries and okay indecent productions, or the other way around. Yeah,
Oh, it's wild. And so what's happening in Germany?
right. So Germany, there's a lot of modern day celebrations of May across
Hmm.
Germany. In modern Europe, I'm assuming is May 1st also Labor Day in Ireland as
Um,
well.
God, I think it's put under Saints Day, but it's definitely a day because Saint Bridget's Day. Oh no, couldn't be Saint Bridget's Day. Saint Bridget's Day is the other one. Boo, boo, boo. Which saint is it? It's put under one of the Saints Days. Anyway. It's not Labor Day. It's put under one of the saints, and it's literally. You think I should know the answer, and it's gone completely over my head because I've been so addicted to Baltina. Um,
You've been gone for too long, eh?
yeah, I know, right?
Well, May 1st across most of Europe now is Labor Day, right?
Mm,
And that was actually invented in the 19th century, I think, in Britain.
yeah.
In
Because it
fact,
is they replaced all these like it's the same with Saint Stephen's Day around Christmas where they replaced it with Boxing Day. It's like what Labor Day, Boxing Day? These are not my saints.
right, right. It's Boxing Day, yeah.
Yeah.
So in Germany, there's a lot of some of the earliest poetry have that I found anyway about the Maying actually comes from the German Minnesänger,
Mm,
right? The troubadours, the famous troubadours of the 12th, 13th century in Germany. It was a real golden era for German culture,
mm,
actually. Um, and Von Wolkenstein actually talks about, he has this whole song where he talks about the Maying and he describes what happens. He talks about singing and dancing and playing and running around and going out into nature. And that's in the 13th century. So that is already a practice in Germany. And he talks about dancing around the tree.
mm.
And what we're going to talk about Maypoles as a separate thing because it's like its own separate topic. But yeah, so he's talking about. Oh no, you can go to the next one. It's good.
There it is.
Yeah, he's talking about dancing, and this is a depiction of people dancing. In fact,
Mm,
what's interesting about this depiction. So this is actually early 15th century, which is like a century and a half after Wolkenstein died, but. You can see for those of you who can look closely, the men are actually leading the ladies by the sleeve,
mm,
right? Like the hanging part of their sleeve. So they're not daring to touch hands. That's too salacious. They're actually connected by fabric instead of by skin.
mm.
And that I haven't seen that outside of the depiction of the Maying, and that the implication could be that the season is too hot. It
Yeah.
is too passionate to risk that level of contact
Will I
in our dancing.
will I get that right
But
now?
yeah, right.
uh,
Except not that kind of heat.
oh
It's
no.
the Okinawa heat.
Yeah, not that kind of heat at all. I wish it was that kind of heat right now with the way everything's getting so sticky out here.
Yeah, I have to confess I'm a humidity person. I grew up in extreme humidity and my skin and hair respond really well to it. So it doesn't bother me so much.
I'll jump over to the next slide, will I?
Yeah, so that's those
Oh,
are some
more
of the
stickiness.
earliest practices we have. And this is from yeah, this depiction is it's got all the elements of a May scene.
Mm,
It's got the hawk, it has the tree with the freshly blossomed flowers and the lovers in in reclined together intimately. And this is from the Manessa Codex for those who aren't familiar with that amazing work,
Mm,
which is a collection of mini Sänger songs. So von Wolkenstein's work is also contained in this collection.
mm.
So this is Germany. This is, if you can imagine, Germans looking so relaxed and and so leisurely. This is it in the 13th century in Germany. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. I've seen this one like a dozen times, and I know it's great to actually be able to put an image, the correct understanding to this image as well. Because the moment I saw it and saw the hawk and stuff, I was like, so this is where we're going with this. So very, very good picture. And tell me, what's happening over in the Italian states at this
Oh
point?
God, Italy. Italy can't have nice things. So
Why? What have they done now?
Italy's no, so okay, for those who just briefly, Italy is not a country at this point. It doesn't become a country until the 1860s, and it only becomes a country after extreme violence
Oh
to
yeah.
force it to be a country. So at this point, you've got a lot of different principalities and city states and republics. You've got the papal states, and all of them have their own traditions, their own customs, some of which overlap. I'm not saying like it's the moon versus Venus,
Mm,
but so you can't necessarily talk about Italy. We can talk about, and I'm not going to talk about all of Italy because I don't have enough time in my day, in my life, to go that deeply into all of the Italian city
yeah.
states. So I'll talk about two different polities that are different in what they are. So we've got Florence, which what we have here is
Mm,
actually Dante with Beatrice, and Beatrice is guiding him through his dream vision, right? Through um not through heaven. She doesn't take him through hell. Virgil
mm,
actually takes him through limbo and through hell, but Beatrice takes him through heaven, through paradise.
mm,
So this is a depiction of Beatrice taking him through paradise. And the reason I chose that image on purpose, because one of the earliest references I found to May Day
mm, mm, mm.
in Italy, and I'm not saying that there's not earlier ones, just the ones that I found, was this famous meeting between Dante and his muse, Beatrice, the woman with whom he fell instantly in love,
Mm.
on May Day at a May Day party at the Portinari Palazzo, which was her father's house.
Oh.
And he fell in love with her at the ripe age of 9.
Okay.
And
Not half pushing
and
it.
and she was like 6 months his junior.
Mm,
So, you know, Um, but it's interesting that the thing this tells us a couple of things about May Day celebrations in Florence at that time. One, private parties happening in private homes.
mm,
So it was absolutely being celebrated. There was feasting and there was dancing inside the Palazzo of the Portinari. And in 1300, which is roughly when this happened, it would have been one of those tower houses that for which Italian city states were so famous in the Middle Ages, right?
mm, mm,
So
mm.
there would have been a decently sized space inside, but we're not talking the great halls of the Renaissance because they were still living like people were trying to kill them all the time, which they were. So that wasn't paranoia, it was a rational fear to
Mm.
worry that henchmen were going to come in the night and slit your throat if you didn't have a good tower house.
And people in Italy stopped that at some stage, did it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
right.
at some point. I mean, it happened event. I think
Maybe.
it
Anyway, quickly
stopped at
moving
some point.
on.
I couldn't tell you when exactly it stopped, but it did someday stop.
I couldn't even tell you if it stopped yesterday.
um, so Florence so what we have here is this is actually a depiction of a procession, the triumph of love,
Mm,
right? And so you see love there depicted as Eros, as Cupid. Of course, sorry, Cupid, because of course, Italy in the Middle Ages in Italy, they used the Latin names for gods and goddesses and deities because the Greeks were considered to be an inferior people, and we don't use Greek names. But anyway,
aye.
um, so we have Cupid, and this actually depicts what was possibly a real parade float because Florentines and the Italians in general are all about parade floats.
Mm,
And every single holiday of the year had a parade with parade floats. And there were confraternities, like clubs basically, whose sole purpose was to make costumes and build the floats and put on feasts and put on jousts and put on dances and go around the city just being, conspicuously consumptive, basically. So this may actually be a depiction of a real float that really existed, and that would have happened on May Day, because the triumph of love in the Florentine calendar, love is May. It's May Day, right? And so what you see here, you actually see men and women, and there you can tell they're young. These are not matrons. You can tell they're not matrons because their heads are not covered, right? And I mean, like they have things on them, but they're not completely veiled, and they're not swathed in a mantle to cover themselves, which would indicate that they were married women. And what we know about Florentine men is they would actually, and actually there's a picture, if you go to that picture of the knights with the trees, they're cutting a branch.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
That one. Yeah. So this is actually, there we go. Yeah. The Torriani hours. This is actually showing May Day, and it is showing the knight and his retinue, and that's his servant. And of course, the knight's not doing it for himself. No, he's got a servant to go and cut the branch for him. So the knight is going to take that branch, or the nobleman, or if this is Florence, then it's might be a knight, but not a nobleman, because technically there were no noblemen in Florence at this point, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, he's cutting a branch, and he's going to take that back, and he's going to march in that procession with his branch. And then he's going to nail it or affix it in some way, but I can't imagine any way other than nailing it to the door of his beloved, the woman who is the object of his desire and choice for the month of May.
Aww.
And it's got to be a freshly blossomed branch. You can tell the leaves are really light green here, and like even the wood looks green and fresh, so it's a newly sprouted branch. So that is a practice that they also apparently was also in parts of France, especially like the northern Italy adjacent parts of the French speaking world. Same practice. And they also did this in Milan as well. But I don't know that, because it was the courtiers in the court of the Sforza in the Castello Sforzesco. I couldn't find out how they delivered the branch. Like, I don't know if they affixed it to the door of their chosen lady's bedchamber, except that those ladies probably shared bedchambers. So I don't know how they would specify. So I don't know if they just handed the branch to them, or
they're just happy if anyone responds.
they're just happy if anyone responds to their branch of offering.
Yeah. Kind of gets to that desperate hour at some stage.
Right. Yeah. So, there was also in Florence. So if you've gone to Florence in this era on May Day, yeah, you can absolutely go to that one with the float you just saw. Yeah, 100%. Yep. So this is another depiction. This is from a cycle of ours, frescoes, actually, depicting May. And again, you've got this amazing float. And this is probably a depiction of an actual float in these parades as they would have looked. I wish our parades had floats that look this elegant. Like our floats are just garish and big and technological. This is just beautiful. And you've got a couple, if you look closely in this picture, you're going to see some interesting elements that would tell the viewer that this is May and it's a celebration of the Maying. You'll notice in the back, kind of upper left, there are hawks sitting on a hawk perch, basically preparing for hunting, which is definitely something that, was done by those who could afford to do so in Italy. And you've got down below, you've got this kind of these series of images showing bounty and plenty. And on the bottom right, it's hard to tell because this fresco, unfortunately, was part of a ruined castle that sat vacant and rotting for a long time. So the frescoes weren't exactly in the best condition. But in the folds of his cloak, there's fruits and flowers and leaves kind of bound up on the inside of his cloak. You can kind of sort of see it now around his legs, behind his legs. And of course, he has the arrows of love. So, this kind of will help you visualize what it would have been like May Day in Florence. You would have had floats like this. They would have been surrounded by young dancing women of the household. They would have also been accompanied by very well-dressed Giovanni, young men. And they did have livery, by which I mean clothing that represented the season. But whereas everywhere else in Europe, it seems to be green as the color of Maying, in Florence, they don't seem to care. One one particular club, May Day Club, and actually they didn't just do May Day. They were a club that did all the holidays. One confraternity, their signore, their lord, the one who sponsored them, basically paid for them all to have matching yellow clothing. And in the sense of livery, in the sense of it was delivered to them by this man, not that it was this man's heraldry or colors or anything like that. So we know in Florence, anyway, it wasn't just green. Green was not apparently the color of Maying, which if you've been to Florence in the medieval parts, you can maybe understand that they weren't the most connected to the season, to the greenery of the outside world, because some people had gardens and a lot of people didn't. So, Florence in the Middle Ages was a pretty dark place, literally speaking. I don't mean metaphorically.
Okay. That's a quite interesting one. Especially
So
going
there
back
would have been music and dancing and jousting. And apparently, this is why I said Italy can't have nice things. Apparently, two of these confraternities, these troops of dancing, and they were going through the streets, right? And it wasn't like it was an organized parade. They're just randomly parading about individually. And eventually, the Donati and what was the other? One of the other families who was not a fan of the Donati, they collided, like literally physically collided, and it actually sparked this minor civil war.
Why am I not shocked? Welcome to Italy in the medieval era. Fighting over a bucket, are we? Shall we? Go!
It's like it's supposed to be the day of love. We're supposed to be celebrating the return of life. And these lovely ladies are dancing and singing their May songs. And there were special songs for May Day and for May in general. And no, we bump into each other. How dare you?
Oh God, gotta love it. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Italians and everything, but why is that so fitting to Italian medieval history? Like,
I mean, in Florence, it's a common theme. And it seems that in Florence, May Day it started off as being this pseudo-feudal celebration, like in the 13th, 14th century. Or in the 13th century, it was, the patricians, we'll call them, of the city, were celebrating it on a private level. Like I told you, Dante is over at the Portinari Palazzo falling in love with 9-year-old Beatrice. So, it's this private party kind of thing where the patricians are, having their own little fetes and their parades and their own little dance troops and their own jousts, etc. But then this is a weird little known fact. There was a Duke of Athens. In for most of the Middle Ages, it was a title. It sprung up, I think, during the Latin when Constantinople was briefly made a Latin empire again, right? And so this Duchy of Athens, this Dukedom of Athens, became this title. And in the mid 14th century, the Duke of Athens didn't live in Athens; he lived in Florence, and as one does. And he apparently decided he was going to try to take power in the city by currying favor with the majority of the people there who were not the patricians, with the people who were not parts of guilds, who were actually doing a lot of the really hard labor. And so he formed these confraternities, lots of them, with the popoli minuti, the little people, literally. And he actually allowed them to take, like, each of these confraternities that he founded, he then gave each one a king. And so they would actually give themselves titles like Paleologue and Emperor and Duke and Marquis. And so each of these confraternities had a king so-and-so. And, this actually basically made the aristocrats of Florence go, May Day, that's just so gauche. We're going to focus our energies instead on Carnivale. We'll make that the patrician holiday to focus our efforts on.
Yeah.
So it really developed this, the cool people aren't doing May Day anymore. So we cool people are going to go do Carnivale instead. But But I know, right? But that didn't really end. That didn't mean they weren't still participating. So in 1489, May Day celebrations are still a going concern. 1489 comes along. Lorenzo de' Medici is the uncrowned prince of Florence at this point,
Mm,
and there's a record of him donating, and it's kind of, we don't know if he's donating or lending. I think lending is maybe a better word. He's lending one of the confraternities, one of the May Day confraternities, plates and service and equipment in order to run a feast for May Day.
mm,
And mind you, this is all of his stamped and marked things. So it's going to have Medici livery, all Medici heraldry all over it. And so everyone is going to know that this confraternity is basically being sponsored by the uncrowned prince of Florence. So, and in fact, he wrote a whole book of songs for dancing, and there are May songs in there.
mm.
So, even though the nobility were trying to kind of focus on Carnivale, um, they were still fully celebrating, and that continues on until basically Florence
Florence.
stops being a duchy when the Medici die.
Mm, mm, mm. But like, given the tension of the build-up of the previous 40 days up to May, it's difficult not to just suddenly stop celebrating it. You know, you have to have that sudden release at the end. So I can't quite understand how they could just, nobility think they could just move, all the attention onto Carnival Day and stuff. So it's kind of funny to me, like,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's you can't force things.
yeah,
It's not, that's just not how it works.
yeah,
You just can't force things. And in Florence, the May is also, there's just full of, like, basically May Day until the Feast of John the Baptist in June just seems to be like a series of celebrations and saints' days, because of course then you also have all the Pentecost stuff, and you've got, the Feast of Corpus Christi, and the Feast of the Ascension, and so there's all these other things happening. So
mm,
it's, okay, you can try to focus your energies on Carnivale, but meanwhile, there's all these feast days anyway.
mm, mm, mm,
So
mm. And
yeah, it would have been a really fun time to be in Florence. And in the court of Milan, they definitely took it, which is the contrast, right? Because Milan is a duchy,
mm,
and so the Sforza are in power basically from the middle of the 15th century onward. And, the Milanese court at that point starts getting really structured, and they want to do all the celebrations as big and loudly as possible as a sign of power.
mm.
And so for the Maying in the court of Milan is a particularly extra courtly affair. Whereas in Florence, they're trying to pretend like they're nobles, but instead they're just getting into civil wars, apparently, over
Oh, the
dancing to each
joys of
other.
Italy. And what's going on in this picture here?
Oh, right. So England, this is all part of England. So what we have here is, so are we going, are we turning over to Maypoles? Because this would fall under the heading of the
One second.
Maypoles.
I know I got France, and then I went over to England next. Maybe it was just, yeah, that was my English lot there. So maybe that picture got slightly mixed up a wee bit.
Yeah, so France and England are kind of connected,
Oh well, listen, I'm glad so.
in their May Day traditions,
Mm.
right? So
Maybe we'll skip ahead there a wee bit. So this is Germany. Oh, sorry, this is still in Italy, is it? Or we popped over to Germany.
no, this is France. So this is all
Right.
this all falls under the Maypole
Okay.
discussion of the Maypole. Yeah, this is Maypole too.
Mm.
So if we want to talk about Maypoles, we can.
Might as well.
Um, yeah, yeah. The Maypoles are, so we call it a maypole, but it was called a May tree in France. It was also called a May tree in Germany. Um, Chaucer refers to it as a summer rod. Um, and so, here, these days, when people imagine a maypole, when you imagine a maypole, Philip, what do you imagine?
Oh, I just think of well, in Ireland we have a tendency of just throwing down the maypole and just worshipping a tree again, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Right,
What
right.
was it called? I think of that big kind of witch kind of crown thing, and all the people with their what was it called? This is an Irishman trying to describe a weird English thing now here.
Ribbon?
The ribbons, yeah, yeah, that's the one, and then them all
The
dancing around the place
ribbon.
like lunatics. Yeah, 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 that's the one.
So I'm just going to burst everyone's bubble. That's a new tradition.
Oh, okay.
Dancing, dancing to weave the ribbons around the pole is not even a little bit medieval.
Mm,
And it doesn't. We have, so this is, here you see peasants dancing around a maypole, and a may tree, as it would have been called in France.
mm,
And you can tell that because if you'll notice, it's like got this weird umbrella top. That's because all the branches have been stripped. If you actually look closely at this picture, you will see the little stumps of branches that once were. This tree doesn't naturally grow this way. This was the practice,
mm,
right? They would actually take a tree generally out of the forest, the one that they'd chosen, and they would cut all of its branches off up to the crest. And then they would stick that in the ground and they would dance around it. So they did dance around the maypole, but they didn't have ribbons to
mm,
do that. Now there's some, I found a couple of references to some maypoles, may trees, having wreaths and flowers and greenery and garlands, and some of them were painted and some of them had colored strings. I don't think they were ribbon. Ribbon in this period would have, like ribbons like we think of ribbon, like we dance with now. Ribbon in this period would have been insanely expensive because it would have been made of silk.
mm, mm.
And the amount of ribbon you would need to cover a tree like that, would be prohibitively expensive. And oh my God, who would do that? Why would you oh my God, I just can't even imagine. Especially because it's generally not the aristocrats who are doing May trees. It's the people in the towns, it's the peasants. It doesn't seem to be the May tree doesn't seem to be part of the aristocrat celebration of May Day.
Mm, mm, mm.
So so yeah, you've got this tree, and it's been stripped of its branches, and that is in essence what the maypole was. Now there's one reference to a 1595, one of these stodgy Puritan types, writing about the evils of May Day traditions. He calls them pagan, by the way, because they were Catholic, not because they were pagan. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused
Mm.
about these things being pagan traditions,
Yeah.
because Puritans called anything that was related to the Catholic Church or the practice of Catholicism as pagan.
Mm.
And these things were actually, these May trees were often set up in front of the church,
Yeah.
actually. But that particular Puritan, he talks about the tree being painted and bedecked and wrapped in colored string and then set up, which tells you that all that decoration happened before you set the tree up, not afterwards,
Mm.
which is just, kind of supports the idea that there wasn't dancing to decorate the tree. The dancing happened after the tree was set up. And, here's Oigel the Elder, depiction of, as you see, it's a town, it's a village. This is as peasanty as you can get, and it's a tree that's really kind of sad, and it's had its branches stripped, and all it has is that little crest at the top.
Mm.
This was a practice that the maypole also, and the May tree was also set up in Slovakia apparently in the 15th century. That's the earliest documentation I could find for it. And everywhere it seems to have this connotation of protection, right? Like this tree is going to protect you against evil spirits, not just romance. It's going to protect you against, because it's new life, right? It's going to newly sprung. It's going to convey some kind of protection for you. So it's not always about love, but there is apparently a practice, and I wasn't able to document this medievally, of setting maypoles up in front, not just a branch, like we were talking about earlier in Florence and in parts of France, taking a whole tree and setting it up in front of the home of your beloved. Young men would apparently do that. That's apocryphal because I wasn't able to find any primary source evidence of that. And you know me, I like to work directly from primary sources. So if anyone has a medieval primary source documenting that practice in the Middle Ages, please let us know in the comments. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be actually amazing. When it comes down to the Irish side of things, it's very interesting that you highlighted the maypole and all that kind of stuff, because they did try to bring in the maypole around the 19th, 20th century. The British tried bringing it in to allegedly civilize us. So it was a case of the uncivilized people worshipped the tree, and the civilized people would do the maypole with the thing. And they brought in gifts and everything. Like if you did the Maypole, we would grant you gifts and all this kind of stuff, prizes for the winners and all this kind of stuff. And the Irish weren't having any of it because the Irish were purposely boycotting it. So they would they would put in so much effort to set this thing up in the middle of these villages. And the locals would just disappear. They'd go off into the forestry and they'd allegedly worship the tree. Which really annoyed the British because they were there to sit. They felt if the Irish could just take part in this celebration, they would be civilized. They would be more civilized than they were yesterday. And of course, it completely failed because the Irish were boycotting it.
Of course.
Yeah, like we were doing with everything, because I think there's one story, but someone in the comment section can definitely pick this one up. Even the term boycott actually originates in Ireland as well. It was boycott. Who was it? I think it was Cott. They were refusing to work with this guy called Cott, who was a British fella who had messed around with the locals too much. So the whole village and the whole town and ends up the whole country just was refusing to serve him. And that's where the term boycott comes from, is them just refusing to serve this fella because he was horrible to the local Irish. So they decided as a whole group, just don't serve him whatsoever. No one serve him. So that's where the term boycott comes from. So the Irish at this point were boycotting everything the British were doing. And of
course they were.
Yeah. And if you had read up to your history up to that point of the 19th and 20th century, you'd understand why they were boycotting every single thing that was happening. And it was very effective. Yeah. That's why they kept doing it.
Rightfully so.
We'll pop over to France anyway. What's going on with this one? This one's quite interesting. Is it back to the old?
Yeah. So this is May again. This is a depict from a book of hours depicting May, and this is showing the dancing that was typical of the aristocrats. But not only that, you look in the background, you'll see they're picnicking. Yeah. Right, they're sitting out there on pillows and cushions in the wild of the garden. And so France actually had the French court and the various sort of principalities and counties and duchies in the Kingdom of France all have these practices. They had this interesting practice of choosing a political party actually for May, and the flower or the leaf. And then for the rest of the year, it was your job to wear the emblem of your party, of your faction, and to defend its worthiness by extemporizing poetry and singing songs and whatnot. And so, you would actually choose on May 1st, you would declare yourself, the court would get together with the king overseeing, and you would declare yourself a flower or a leaf, and you would don the badge of your choosing. And so one of the things that happened in the French court on May 1st, and this actually happened in a lot of courts around Europe, May 1st was a time when retainers actually received the payment of new clothing from their master, part of their remuneration package. And so the king, Charles VI is king at the end of the 14th and in the early 15th century. And we have two expense accounts from him, from his May Day expenditures. In 1387, he spends a pretty decent amount of money on 24 houppelans, which are these big, houppelans are kind of like the overgarments that the men here are wearing that come down to mid-thigh. That's a kind of houppelande. But the ones in the end of the 14th century went to the ground and dragged on the ground probably, and had very big sleeves. And he actually commissioned 24 green houppelans embroidered in his personal badge, which was the Plantagenet, by the way, the broom, which is the same as the Plantagenet family in England, yes, but they weren't the only ones who had that badge. And so these houppelans, imagine this beautiful sleeve, lined in fur. The whole thing is lined in fur, and it's got this gold embroidered broom vine going from the left shoulder and down the sleeve, and it's gold embroidery, so it's going to glisten. And he commissioned 24 of those, and the household account specifically says so that they would look exactly like the king. So he actually commissioned these what in English was called a gown at that time, or maybe even a coat, so that they would all look like a company together to celebrate, to bring in the May.
Mm.
But then in 1400, he gets really crazy. He goes cray cray, and he commissions 253 houppelans for courtiers of various ranks. And so they've got different levels of, different kinds of fabric. They're all green, but they're not all the same fabric. But they are also, um, apparently, they also have the broom, the plantagenista embroidered on them. So in that sense, it is livery, like many people understand livery, as in it bears the king's badge, but it isn't a specially shaped garment. It's still what is a fashionable cut of garment in 1400.
Mm.
But yeah, he spent a lot of money on the maying. And I think if I looked at the Queen's expense accounts, I'm going to expect to find similar things. I didn't actually think to go and try to find the Queen's expense accounts. Expense accounts in France are annoying because in the revolution, those assholes burnt
Oh,
everything down.
oh
And
yes.
and a lot of the things they burnt down were archives that had things like the expense accounts for queens and duchesses. So we have the expense accounts for dukes and kings, but not for their ladies. For whatever reason, they were kept in a different spot. So,
Because hey, I want to be a nationalist, and I want to prove my nationalism by
right,
destroying as much as my own history as
right,
possible.
exactly. I want to destroy history because that's how we free ourselves. What?
Yeah, yeah. They always, even in Ireland, it's like, okay, time to burn the four courts. What? Anyway, yeah, but another thing I find absolutely hilarious as well is I live in a world where on May, the French are in the middle of setting together very competitive poetry groups, and in Ireland we're just putting on our welly boots and chasing cows. Like, this is the world I live in. Like,
Right? No, you're right. Like literally, it's a medieval rap battle.
yeah.
Literally, they are having competitions that are being judged.
Mm.
Poetry. There's Les de Franchise by Eustache Deschamps, who's kind of one of the chroniclers in around Charles VI time. He writes this long poem describing in detail the courtly practice of Maying in Charles VI's court.
Mm.
And he talks about, well, we go out, the company goes out in the morning. They got up really early. Apparently they got up at dawn. Like he gives some real details. The entire court got up at dawn, not got up at dawn. They left at dawn, which meant they got up earlier than that so they could be dressed and ready to go. They went out into the fields and into the forest. They collected the greenery. They danced. They sang. They rap battled in in late 14th, early 15th century French. They jousted under the king's direction. Like this is a busy ass day, right?
Mm.
And then they collected the greens. They made wreaths for themselves. They made belts and garlands for themselves. They adorned themselves in the greenery. And Jean Froissart, you've probably read some of, one of the most famous French chroniclers, who also talks about the Irish kings in at the end of the 14th century.
Mm. Mm.
He actually talks about, he's very specific when he talks about the kinds of wreaths they make. He actually specifies that they make a wreath without a form. So it doesn't have a frame. It's not one of these really stylized hats that's, fabric on a rigid frame. It is just a wreath, a
Mm.
simple wreath to celebrate the simplicity of nature, which is at complete odds with these houppelans made of, silk damask and embroidered in gold. That's a charming conceit that we're getting closer to nature just by making some wreaths, but everything else about us is as artificial as it can get.
Yeah, it's funny he pops up again because wasn't his work that documented, as you were saying there, Archmac Kavanagh when he was campaigning against Richard
Yep.
II. If you're
Yep.
still looking for that video, I had to take that video down because allegedly, according to YouTube, it was too violent, and it's
What?
annoying.
My
I had a Frenchman read out all those lines for me in that video for Archbach Kavanagh and the Gaelic resurgence because it was fitting with the Peasants' Revolt. So while the Peasants' Revolt was happening in England, we had the Gaelic resurgence of Ireland. And the video was considered too violent on YouTube, so it had to be taken down. So
too violent.
yeah, so I might do a few changes and stuff and post it back up later on with a few alterations done and stuff because it was two parts, and at the time I could make those adjustments, but I was just so busy. I had so much going on. So I was like, I'll come back to it. It's over my Patreon anyway. If you jump over to my Patreon, it's a
Thank
great way to
God.
advertise the Patreon as well. But if you can go over to the
Yeah,
Patreon,
thank
everything,
God for Patreon,
I
where we can
know,
put
right?
all the things that YouTube tries to blackball us for.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
But yeah, anything that's a bit too crude is over on Patreon anyway. So if you want to see any of that stuff, definitely head over to my Patreon and have an old gawk for yourself. So you said this is actually so me and Rachel at the start of the week. What was it? I quickly put together a cover photo and stuff, and this was the cover photo Rachel wanted. And I just couldn't get it working into the cover photo the way I had it planned in my head. So I ended up sacking it and just kept the original one to
that's
annoyance of
okay.
Rachel.
It's fine.
So why
It's,
is this one so important? Why did you have to have this one?
well, because this is the quintessential depiction of the Maying, right?
Mm,
This is the most famous Maying party in the history of the world. This is Jean de Berry, who was a royal peer of France in this era and a massive Renaissance man in the sense of a big proponent of the arts and has like one of the most expensive, beautiful books of hours ever made.
mm,
It actually depicts an actual Maying party. So you can see these knights wearing their splendid robes. The interesting thing about it, though, is that the ladies are the ones wearing the green. But if you look on all of them, the musicians, the knights, the ladies, all of them, if you look closely enough, you'll see they've got wreaths on there. They've got wreaths on, they've got garlands of actual leaves draped over them, right? So you can actually see what Eustache Deschamps meant when he's and Froissart meant when he said they went out and they put greenery on them.
mm,
And you can see they're not fancy. These wreaths are not finely made. They're not artificial. There's no artifice about them. They took the minimal amount of time necessary to get some greenery and throw it on themselves and get back to the fine activities of Maying. Yeah.
mm, mm.
So this is probably the most famous May calendar illustration ever, like in the history of art.
That's absolutely fascinating. And now I can see the only thing I can't see in this one is the hawk. Maybe because I've put the picture in the wrong place. But is there a
Yeah,
hawk
no, no,
here?
no. So the weird thing is that there is, even though it looks like it should be a hawking party, and for all, like you expect to see a hawk here, but they're not.
Mm,
This is just them going out into the forest with a full complement of musicians, as one does,
mm.
obviously. Um,
Yeah, of
and
course, like as you do.
as you do, with your three Sean players and a sack butt or two. I mean, whatever.
Hi.
Yeah, so this is just a depiction of them, going on horseback. And if you notice, even the horses have green barding. They've really gone all out to try to capture the green of the season.
Mm,
I suspect, so actually the thought just occurred to me. The reason that the gentlemen, especially the two gentlemen wearing blue, might be wearing blue has nothing to do with them actually having worn blue in this depiction. This is the era when lapis lazuli is being used as the pigment of choice for blue.
ah.
And that's why there's so much deep blue in this. This page is conspicuous consumption. They're trying to put blue in as many places as possible. And if you look closely, the trees in the background, the trunks are actually shaded with blue to bring the color out. It's a semi-precious stone from Afghanistan. It's crazy expensive to import into Europe in this era.
Mm,
And so anytime you see all these paintings from this era with blue, it wasn't about whether the sky was actually that blue or they were actually wearing blue clothes or tree trunks grew blue. They didn't, obviously. Um,
obviously, like.
it's literally the patron saying, look, I can afford to just use a semi-precious stone to paint my book of hours that I will occasionally open, but not very often. Because, how often do I have time to do that? Probably a 15th century French warlord, actually.
Yeah. Oh, the joys of being rich. So I see
Right.
two grassmen here, lunging at each other in a tournament. What's going on here? Like, he seems to have all the
Yeah,
May
so this is
festives
this
going
is
on.
exactly, this is depicting the May jousting, like that I told you about them going out into the forest and jousting under the king's supervision. Yeah, jousting was something that happened. We always imagine like a Knight's Tale style joust where it's in this list and there's bleachers and it's all very structured. But if you read a lot of chronicles from the 14th and 15th century, you get the impression that these knights were just like, I've got a lance, I've got a horse, I'm wearing harness, let's go.
Yeah, it looks like that in the picture for sure. Your man doesn't even look like he has a lance. It looks like he's trying to hit the other guy with a
Right.
stick that he just picked up from the side
So
of the
this,
road.
yeah, exactly. So they've actually one of them like has a tree, like
Yeah.
literally if you can see the roots. So this is kind of also like playing off of the wild man idea.
Hmm.
So what we don't know, or what I don't know, this could actually be depicting because this is something 15th century people and late 14th century, they love to dress up in costumes and pretend to be things they weren't. Nothing new under the sun, right?
Oh,
And so there are plenty of records of royal peers dressing up as wild men and doing wild men things. The Bal des Ardents, in which they dress up like wild men and then catch on fire, and half the royal peers of France all die at once. That's a real thing. So this could be depicting wild men, or it could be depicting peers dressed as wild men on jousting during the festivals of May, the celebrations of May, the Fête de Mai, you say in French. But I thought it was really interesting because this is the part of the calendar that is May.
hmm.
So it's the artists were very clearly signifying to the viewer, this is May. Look, here's knights. Here's wild men in green jousting the way wild men must joust, I guess, with trees, because you can just grab them anywhere, I guess.
I don't know. It just looks
Yeah.
absolutely
I don't know.
wild. Even up in the top right corner with the two women.
Okay. Question, how is that blue called? The blue pigment is lapis lazuli
Ah.
is the pigment. Is that stone. Let me see. Let me get down off of my duck before I get on up on a horse.
Yeah, of
Yeah, of
course.
course.
That's the way we do
You
it.
know, as one does.
Oh, I quickly move on to the next
Yeah.
part. So we're over in England now. Okay, so this is very fitting. Everyone's in green in this one, and then we have two women
Yep.
wrestling. And I flick over, and we still have two women wrestling. And yeah, you said that there were similarities between England and France. I think I can see
There-
it.
Yeah. So those two women, those are Gemini. So remember that the
Oh,
astrological sign of Gemini starts in May.
okay, so that's myself.
Um, yeah, it's always interesting to see how people interpret that picture.
Yeah.
Embracing, wrestling, what's the difference, really?
Yeah, well, that's it. Like,
I can tell you're a martial artist. You're like, oh, they're hugging.
like,
They
yeah,
must they must
yeah,
they must be grappling.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so again, we have the knight hawking in green. Out in the nature, you can see civilization way in the background behind him. Like he has clearly left things in the background. So England also had the practice of the flower and the leaf.
Hmm.
And we know that because there's actually an entire lengthy poem called The Flower and the Leaf, but it's moralizing. It's really interesting because it actually suggests that the leaf is the superior party
Oh.
because leaves last forever,
Hmm.
right? Especially evergreen leaves. Whereas flowers are transient and will, even though they're beautiful, they will fade and they're not useful, is the implication of the poem. And so in this poem, the party of the leaf has their jousting and they make their wreaths and they have a nice healthy lunch of salads. And meanwhile, the party of the flower are out getting sunburnt. Because they're so delicate. But the party of the leaf is very gracious. They go in, they treat the sunburnt flower people with their herbal ointments that they've made from the leaves from the trees, and they feed them healthy saladas, as they say in 15th century English, very, very natural, nothing artificial. And so based on that, we know, I mean, it's pretty evident that the practice of the flower and the leaf that was part of the French court absolutely was present in the English court as well. And it doesn't hurt that Charles d'Orléans, who was one of the peers of France, was the brother of the king, ended up Henry V brought him back to England as a captive.
Oh,
You may or may not recall.
yeah.
And he was a captive for like 25 years in England, where he learned English. And he started writing poetry in English, and he writes about May practices in England, because even though he was, 'cause he was a captive for like 25 years in England, where he learned English, and he started writing poetry in English, and he writes about May practices in England, because even though he was, 'cause he was a captive for like 25 years in England, where he learned English, and he started writing poetry in English, and he writes about May practices in England, because even though he was a captive there. He wasn't like in a tiny
He was
cell.
having
He
a good
went out
time.
and did, right. Yeah,
Holiday
he was
life.
fine. He was fine. And so he writes about the May Day practices in the court, in the English court, and they sound almost exactly like the practices, at least the amorous aspect, choosing a party, declaiming love for your inspiration, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
it's not surprising that England in this period would have very, very similar practices to the practices in France and Burgundy as well, right?
Yeah.
They're all culturally bound together, basically.
There's a very good question that SJ asked there, and that's the clothing in the era. Is that meant to replicate the nature in itself, especially with the green and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So it's this, yes and no. It's an interesting tension, right? Because fabric isn't naturally green. You have to do all sorts of artificial things to it.
Uh,
By artificial, I mean the intervention by humans, right? The dye stuffs they're using are natural in this era, but the process is artificial. So yeah, they're literally trying to bring the rebirth of life, the birth of spring onto their person and kind of become the May
mm,
by wearing green. So in essence, yes, it is trying to replicate nature, and certainly the wearing of the garlands, of the wreaths, adorning yourself, flowered chaplets as well, not just leaves, flowered baldric sort of arrangements, right? Yeah, that's definitely all, probably a way people were trying to make the intangible tangible, right? Like you can see the rebirth around you, you can see everything coming back, but to really feel it in your person, you want to wrap yourself in it. And
yeah.
that's literally a physical way of wrapping yourself in new life, literally
Mm,
by putting it on your body. It doesn't get more intimate than that, really.
mm,
So,
mm.
yeah, I think so.
Absolutely fascinating. And I can see more of the kind of May dancing going on here. Although this
Yep.
woman here does remind me of Ireland, to be quite honest with you, because we do actually have a 14th
The
century
harp.
coat of arms from Ireland. And in it, it actually has a harp that's very similar to this with blue in the background. So when I seen this, I was like, oh, a little nod to Ireland. Perhaps not, but
Yeah, it's funny how instruments get nationalized in the
mm,
modern in more recent times. The bagpipe must be Scotland,
yeah.
the harp must be Ireland. But in the in the medieval era, kind of everyone had everything,
It's very
right?
true as
So
well.
the lap harp is it was a common instrument in all over Europe, and in fact, in the Howard household accounts from 1460s, so this would be Norfolk, basically the Duchy of Norfolk in England. There's an entry paying a harper to come and repair, or paying a harper to repair the Duke's harp. The
Mm,
Duke's harp.
yeah.
Whether or not the harper came there or the harp went there, I don't know, but the harper was paid to fix it.
Mm,
So it is nice to think that there was definitely this interconnection, right? Like we all had harps, we all had bagpipes, we all had shawms.
mm,
And this is literally a personification of May. You can see the word Maya kind of a little bit faint, written right above her head, the harpist's head.
mm.
And yeah, these are the ladies dancing in the May. And the whole idea behind the May dances is that they should be much more extemporized than the usual choreographies that you see at court.
Mm.
That was, they're supposed to be free and natural and out on the grassy green, which they didn't have lawnmowers, so I'm not certain how they kept grass short back then. I guess sheep.
Yeah, in I'm actually going to cover that in a bit. Actually, it's funny you should say that. But yeah, go on anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, that's basically what this is depicting, is this dancing that seems to be everywhere. It's
Mm,
dancing is seems to be inextricably bound up in May Day celebrations across Europe. And there's this idea of women dancing just themselves that also seems to be, I mean, there was certainly co-ed dancing that happened on May Day, but there's also this idea but also we should let the women go dance and we should just watch them, which
mm.
I'm certain was titillating in and of itself.
Yeah, nice.
Right.
Uh, oh, and then you've got the same kind of style again, except for this time you've got people kind of going for an old nice wander in the evening.
Right.
Oh, and I see there at the very bottom, we have a heavy indication of what they're up to, is it?
Yep. Yep. So this is actually Henry VIII's hours, one of his sets of
Ah.
hours anyway. And this is the May page. So I chose it because it's England.
Hmm.
And you can see they've got branches, right? They each have a branch. The two lovers who are going for their walk in the woods, and she has a green kirtle underneath of her gown, and he's wearing a green jack, or maybe we call it a Waffenrock in German.
Hmm.
And they're out there in the forest with their dog, which could be an indication of hunting. Like maybe there's a hawk somewhere over there.
Hmm.
But she's not dressed exactly like a noblewoman, right? Because
Yeah.
her skirts are hiked up, and she looks kind of more peasanty, but he looks like a noble man. So
He's up to no
this might
good.
be a May Day romance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I know he's up to. um,
right.
and I think this is the photo from before, so we can
Yeah,
easily
yeah. We
jump
can
over
move
again.
past
Aye.
that.
Which is now fitting more
Wales.
into my team now as we go from Wales then and
Yeah.
eventually over to Ireland. And at this
Yeah, so
point now,
no, go on.
oh no, I was just pointing out now, at this point now I can actually tell what's going on in the picture with the hawk and him off in the nature trying to catch. And I'm assuming this is around, this is me taking a quick guess, the 12th century? Or is it later?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
12th century.
exactly. No, no,
That's
no. This is
very
definitely,
fascinating. Ah,
yeah,
because
yeah. This
Ireland
is
and
this is
Wales would be
definitely
quite close.
earlier.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad you actually put this here, because Wales obviously connects closer to Ireland
Mm.
than France does, and actually in practice also. So the earliest reference I could find for Wales to celebrating May Day, and they call it Calends Maya, just like
Mm.
Calen di Maggio in Italian, which literally means the calends of May. That's the Latin term. The calends is the word for the first day of the month.
Mm.
So in Wales, they actually they use this Latin portmanteau, calends Mai, to refer to. There's also a Welsh word, but I'm not going to embarrass anyone, let alone myself, by attempting to pronounce that word.
Oh, stop!
Um,
It's even Welsh people don't even know how they speak Welsh. I was
it's
listening. If you're ever listening to the Welsh Viking, and the way he teaches Welsh, Welsh is a difficult one. All right, like it's a fun little tongue twister.
mm, it really is, and I'm not. They've got a Latinate word. I went with that one, and it's a medieval. It was used heavily in the Middle Ages. So the earliest reference I could find to May Day celebrations in Wales is actually from 900, and it involves bonfires. They would
Ah,
light bonfires and cattle. They would light bonfires to bless the cattle before letting the cattle go out to pasture.
mm,
Because apparently in Wales, May 1st was when they would actually send them out to the meadows, like the mountain meadows sort of thing,
mm,
instead of keeping them either enclosed, or in maybe a smaller pasture right next to the manor or the farm, right? But before that, the priest would actually come and bless.
mm,
They would light fires, and they would bless the fires, and they would bless the cattle. And the smoke is then supposed to be holy, and it's supposed to spread about and bless everything with its thing. So that's the earliest. That's the earliest reference I could find documentable in a primary source to Wales celebrating Cullen's Mai. And Wales also has one of the earliest documentable references to maypoles. Germany actually is the earliest in Aachen, where the townspeople set one up in Aachen, and then this priest comes along and cuts it down. So the mayor sets up a bigger one, and then the city catches on fire 2 days later, and it burns to the ground. But in Wales, there's this poet who writes this really. His name is David, damn it, op something op Davith.
mm,
He's a lot of ops, and there's a lot of Daviths in there, but he's writing in the mid 14th century, and he writes this really melancholy poem of this tree. The townspeople go into the forest and they cut down this tree, and they strip it of its branches, and they drag it into the town, and they put it in the center of the town next to the pillory he mentions, and they dance around it and they tromp around it. And this poor thing has been stripped of its beauty and how it's been violated. And he has some pretty obvious comparisons there.
mm.
um, and he's talking about a May tree, but he's talking about it from the perspective of someone who very much loves and respects nature and views that practice as being contrary to nature and utterly violating the beauty of the wood and the trees.
Mm.
And so I thought that was a really interesting perspective to have in the 14th century. That's not usually a medieval perspective is not to respect nature.
Mm.
That's not.
Yeah,
But medieval, yeah,
yeah, it's quite interesting. All right, like yeah, I know in Ireland there's a heavy respect for the oak trees and all that kind of stuff. So perhaps maybe there's a bit of leakage in there. It's difficult to say because sometimes we get over romanticized where neo-pagan ideas, but sometimes they do, like especially the kind of Celtic culture does have this kind of respect for nature thing and the worshipping of the oak tree and stuff. So it's difficult to say what's our modern interpretation and what's actual fact
right.
of them actually respecting nature. Like it's a difficult one to see, especially in the 14th century, where you think that Celtic paganism would, finally completely disappear, but finding elements of it, this whole respect of nature thing is quite funny to see. Like,
Well, it's certain concepts can continue without people knowing why.
mm,
You know, we don't know why we hang flowers over our door, but we do.
mm,
Right.
uh,
It's just even the French say it. In the one of the poems about the Maying talks about we need to go out and follow the old customs.
mm,
Right, but there's no connection to if there was at one point, if this is a continuation of a pre-Christian tradition, no one recognizes what that is. They just know that this things that they've always done, right?
mm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I can't wait to get your reaction to the stuff I'm about to show you because it's very funny that there's a lot of stuff that you kind of had gaps with, but I'm like, oh wait, actually, I might have the answer to a few things you were saying there, and also things that kind of repeat itself as I pop over to the origins of the historical context. And anyone new who's jumping on now, we just spent what was it? A good hour and a half talking about the May Day throughout Europe. So if you want to rewatch that, definitely go ahead and do that. Or if you want to stick ahead now, as we start to cover more into Ireland, and it is very interesting how a lot of the Welsh customs kind of fit into Ireland as well. Of course, as a lot of people that do study Celtic paganism know, Beltane kind of goes back to its original um, pagan traditions and ways, and we can see that with a lot of Iron Age archaeological finds throughout Ireland. All of the main sites in Ireland, which later on would be occupied by ring forts, they all have bonfires. They all have remains of fire damage and also kind of bones and stuff that can be dated back to the Iron Age. And they kind of fit the same rhythm again of two bonfires, and they kind of give us the idea of cattle being pushed between the two cattles and the whole blessings. If you look
Ah, right.
into the 10th century, it talks about Cormac's literature and stuff, and in it, he talks about how the locals they're supposed to be Christianized. So straight away, he recognizes that this is a pagan ceremony. So he's trying to straight away, even in St. Patrick's literature of the time, which St. Patrick himself is kind of going through a revisionist history where you do have people who say, well, St. Patrick did A, B, and C. And in these revisionist history, it has St. Patrick trying to undermine the fire in Tara, trying to undermine these great fires and stuff. But at the same time, you also have St. Patrick lighting his own fire. And he says this within the story of the Lucky Fire. Cormac does, where he turns around and he says that you still have people that come to him at specifically May because they still need their cattle blessed. Like these people are terrified. If their cattle is not blessed, they'll get sick and they die. I
Right.
thought it was quite interesting as well, Rachel, and maybe you're slightly more educated than I am on this, but they believe people, a lot of people now, neo-pagans I've actually spoken to and stuff, actually believe it's actually the heat of the fire that kills a lot of bugs that's on the cattle. And that's why people think. So what was happening is the cows were still getting sick going into the summer months, especially with the change of weather. So there's a theory going around amongst the neo-pagans that the reason why they couldn't shake off Bealtaine was the fact that they quite literally were getting cleansed. The cows were quite literally getting cleansed at the start of May. It's also interesting one as well. So as I was saying here, this is the cleansing of these
Mm,
cows, where especially up and around places like Tara or main assembly areas around Ireland, we can find, especially in Iron Age
right.
sites, when archaeologists go into these ring fort sites and stuff, they can find remains of bonfires because of the animal bones that they can date and stuff, and they can see clear signs that there's two bonfires there and that the cattle are going through. And of course, as I was saying there, you have
Right.
this belief of neo-pagans who believe that it's actually killing off the bacteria that's actually on the outside of the cow. And that makes sense from my perspective.
Well, it does to me as well, not necessarily the bacteria, but the like mites and parasitic bugs, because fumigation. I mean, fumigation is literally smoking things out.
Mm.
So I mean, I don't know about you, but when I inhale smoke, I feel like I'm going to die. So
That's quite
um,
true.
that could make sense. And if you've ever been, have you ever been between two bonfires? I have,
Oh, it's quite hot now.
and and it's hot and it's smoky and you do it. I could absolutely see that much smoke and that, not maybe the heat but more the smoke
Mm,
possibly having that salubrious effect on cattle. Yeah,
mm.
absolutely, that makes sense to me.
So it's definitely a very, very interesting time, and this also goes as far as this celebration doesn't die in the medieval period, although again and again and again you do have the British trying to remove this celebration, but it stays ticking true, and the reason for it is the fact that the cows aren't dying. So if the cows aren't dying and the cows start to die when I don't do it, I'm going to keep doing it, even if you nail me to a tree. you know. So this gets recorded again and again all the way up to the 20th century. We have different teams and reviews on this. Once again, as well, Geoffrey Keaton's also records this happening, the Beltane festival and the gathering of people coming together, lighting the bonfires and bringing it through. But by the time we get up to Keaton's, it's definitely transferred over from a very pagan ritual all the way over to a Christian thing. So it's
Right.
very much the priest would come in, and it's now the priest who's now blessing the cattle. So before, perhaps this is me putting a theory out there. Perhaps it was a druid that was doing all these ceremonies before, coming up, blessing the cattle, making sure that they weren't getting sick going into the summer months and stuff, as they were being moved from the winter pasture over to the summer
Mm,
pasture. Um, so that's quite interesting that we have that important transformation from these summer festivals these winter festivals into these summer festivals, especially going between paganism and Christianity, because we always have this idea that Christianity came over and they just stole all these holidays, when in fact, when Christianity gets brought into Ireland, and even later on when they're trying to bring in the Church of Ireland and Presbyterian faiths, that they're not able to shake this alleged pagan faith away. And that's because it's so important to these people to get their
right.
cows cleansed for the winter.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I know everyone, yeah, accuses Christianity of co-opting or stealing, but there's only so many days in the year.
Yeah, it's very true.
and 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 the kind of realities of the alignment of the stars, of the heavens, and the changing of the seasons, which, for people in climates and latitudes like Ireland and Europe are very important.
Mm,
There's only so many times of year that are important anyway, so it makes sense to align your major religious observances with those.
mm.
You're going to pick the most boring, uneventful astrological day of the year for your religion's biggest holiday. That makes no sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It wouldn't, especially when it's weird for the Irish, because the Irish can't explain it. If you don't do this, the cows all die. Clearly, some kind of magical thing going on here, and we better keep doing it. So
Right.
that's absolutely fine. And even the medieval interpretation of trying to explain why is all my cows dying, but if I do this, the cows don't die. What kind of magic voodoo stuff is going on? And even the way that they try to kind of justify it in their brains. And even later on, when you have the likes of St. Patrick, I know it's revisionist history of the 12th century, and St.
Right.
Patrick lived in the 5th century, But the justification that they give St. Patrick of, okay, well, this is paganism, but now it's called the lucky fire, and now it's done through God, so now it's okay, you know. The way they
Right.
have
Yeah.
to do this kind of stuff, it's very, very exciting for myself to look at this and see that it's not a case of them stealing this identity. It's the fact they have to do this because they can't explain the situation, but they have to continue doing this specific thing of putting the cows through, which is absolutely fascinating to me. Obviously, this is one of these sites today where the archaeologists have actually found, so it would have originally been here and about here, that they had the original bonfires here, and you can see it's on a nice little hingle fort here, and later on obviously this would have been, today now it's considered a fairy fort, so a lot of
Of
people who are
course.
into, a lot of
Yeah.
people who are into the modern day folklore would refer to this as fairy folks. And it's actually funny because I'm in the middle of researching or doing up on a video on ring forts, and we couldn't find, I think it was Yuki was doing all the research into that one because she specialized in the archaeology, but she couldn't find, when she was putting it into search, she couldn't find any of this, typing it in as ring forts. But the moment she put it in as a fairy fort, poof, all
Oh
popped up
God.
for her. Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So it really says it all for you. Um, so anyway, I thought that was very, very interesting. But as I was saying before as
Oh,
well, this
liminality.
is, oh, what's this?
Yeah, no, liminality. I mean, it's liminality is absolutely a big concept in May Day celebrations across Europe. So it completely tracks that it would happen in Ireland as well.
Um, what was it called? I thought this was quite interesting as well because when I was reading up on a lot of neo-paganism, they kind of look at it as a positive fairy folk and back to the positive gods and stuff. But I myself, I couldn't find any positivity, to be quite honest with you. A lot of it was very much in the realm of, bring in, try to find stuff that would bring in kind of luck and positivity and stay away from the negativity. It was very much of a warning of don't call on the fairy folk. And I thought that
Mm,
was, when I was reading it, I was very much like, why did they have this interpretation of this negative energy that's wandering around? Well, for people who don't know, this is the time when there's a change in the pasture. So just to answer Rachel's earlier question of why was the grass so short when they were going out to celebrate these events and stuff, it's because, well, in Ireland at least, they actually kept the cattle during the winter months close to the settlements. But the thing is now all the
right,
cattle and all the animals and stuff have cleared out and shortened all of the grass. So
right,
the grass now has been kind of exhausted, as they were saying, and so now they have to move the cattle on. The problem with that is that they're bringing them to areas that are no longer safe to protect because during the winter months they're protected by the king's retinue, so the king's professional soldiers who are inside a ring fort, and they can easily gawk out and watch your cattle. And so during the winter months,
right,
they're perfectly fine. They're perfectly safe. However, because now all of that grass has been eaten up, they now have to be brought out to the more rougher terrain. And with that gives the opportunity for young war bands to go out and try to steal the cattle. So this is now the start of the cattle raiding season. So the grass is all now cleared up. We can now go off and we can do our events and stuff. However, the cattle now are not safe. And I think
right.
that's where this whole feeling of negative fairy folk comes from. I think it's actually the quote unquote the negative energy of the currents that's kind of still kind of reflecting in itself. This panic that a parent would have that would bring onto a child, and then that child would have the same panic again as they would bring it onto their children. And I think
Right.
because this happened throughout the entirety of the medieval era, where you have these professional cattle raiders called kerns who are out there now, the 1st of May comes and these young fellas between the age of 15 to 25 would
Mm,
go out into the countryside and they would hunt for cattle. Basically, they would steal each other's cattle and they would also headhunt amongst each other. They would get into skirmishes, try to get into a blood feud, so on and so forth. These are not nice people. I am aware that there's a later kind of revisionist history that happens in the 12th century to do with the feeding, where the Fenian are kind of romanticized as these great heroic knights. But if you actually read the original literature during the 8th, ninth, and 10th century, the
Mhm.
Fenian warbands, oh, no shorty Bob, they're horrible, absolute, and the things they do are absolutely despicable. Like Finn McCool, for example, in the 12th century, he's very much romanticized. And I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings with this one, but during the 8th, ninth, and 10th century, no sorry Bob, he's a horrible human being. You know, the types of
Yep.
stuff he gets up to in his tales are
It,
horrendous.
it's funny. It's funny you mention his name. His name came up a lot when I was researching medieval Irish clothing,
Oh, right.
because the epics, legends that are written about him, not sorry, the histories that are written about him. Anyway, they often mention clothing, various articles of clothing.
Mm,
So it was in some of the histories written about him, they talk about his gleaming lena. So
mm.
it's funny that you're mentioning that he was actually a really horrible
Yeah.
person.
He gets romanticized. So from the 12th century onwards, you have the likes of the Tristan and Iseult, you have the
Right.
Arthurian tales, and you also have Finn McCool, who, and it goes in with this kind of Norman, Welsh, Irish kind of romanticizing of the history. And this kind of rewritten history and stuff, because Tristan and Iseult originally is a slave story. We can't find the original story, but that also could have been a horrible story to start with. But it's then kind of, I think when the Normans come in, they're all kind of romanticized again. And we can see the same thing with Finn McCool. But before then, no, Finn McCool is a horrible human being. And that's very interesting. And it could highlight the fact that of why this kind of negative energy, quote unquote, negative energy is wandering around the place. That it could be a kind of reflection of the currents of these Fenian war bands wandering around the countryside and harassing the local people. And you even over time you start to get more and more of this kind of don't do this thing, you're stealing my luck away, you're stealing this energy,
Right.
positive energy away from me. And it's interesting, and it's definitely something I have to look into, as you were saying there with the May Day, with the, bringing the nature into the homes and stuff. Now that you say it, I guarantee the Irish were probably doing that, going out into the countryside while bringing their cattle out and
Right.
bringing that green into their homes and stuff to bring that look in. And it gets to a point where, because people are now so paranoid about protecting their cattle, protecting their food, what something is very, very unlucky to do in Ireland in May is to actually ask for food. If you were to go up to a neighbour and ask for food, it's meant to be considered very unlucky because you have so much thievery going on around
Right.
butter, cows, all that kind of stuff, because it's the sport of it. This is part of the whole banter, is to go and steal food or even to give tribute to someone to make them go away. It's a huge part of what's going on in this period. So you have a lot of local beliefs around the stealing of food, and also to the point of even stealing fire. So what neighbors would do to steal someone's luck is they would go into the house and they would get like a stick of fire or something, and they, where the pot is, which is keeping the food, the stew, nice and warm. They would get a stick and they would put it under the stew pot, and they would try to steal that person's fire, which was, stealing their luck, and they would bring it back to
Right.
their own home and put it into their fire because now you've stolen that person's luck. So it's very interesting how it revolves around this negative energy of the cattle raiding, and then on top, this fear of people getting into your home, stealing what's in your home, and then getting back out again. And even to the fact that you're paranoid of the other. Normally during the winter months or festival months and stuff, there's a real positive. The doors are open. If you're a clan, you can come on in. If you're a guest, no problems. In May, no Cherie Bob, they're not very welcoming to guests. Doors are fortified, doors are locked, go away, we don't want you. Very complete opposite to how Irish people normally act. So it's very interesting that I did find a lot of
Interesting.
this in the May Festival and stuff. Also, I found as
It's
well.
really. I wonder what, like, why. So maybe during the dark, cold winter months, they feel safe inside. They feel
Mm,
like they can welcome people inside because the weather is going to kind of almost add a cloak of protection
yeah,
from. from massive, massive invasions from raids and
Yep,
that
big
kind of
time.
thing. But then maybe with the weather turning fair and the weather no longer, providing that extra layer of protection, then they feel more vulnerable.
Yeah,
That
big
just
time.
maybe. I'm,
Exactly.
I'm just I'm
And
just theorizing.
oh, big time. Because the war bands, from my interpretation, the war bands aren't out during the winter. Like the war bands, they go out and they're out there from May 1st all the way to Samhain, and then the war bands come back in again. And they go back into society, and then people are comfortable to move around again. Um, so definitely during the summer months, there is definitely a somewhat, especially around May, where, as you said, there's a lot of built up energy, especially for young fellas. These guys are around the age of
Right.
15 to 25. A lot of built up energy. And they
Mm,
can't wait to blast that out. And maybe during the period, once they kind of burn themselves out, and we start going into the period of August and all that kind of stuff again, they're not as, the energy isn't as hyped up. But May is definitely a period where there's constantly a warning, don't call on the fairy folk, don't, kind of keep inside your home and stuff.
right.
What I also found very interesting as well is where the rest of Europe is very anti what was it called? The it is very anti witches. So there's a lot of this whole kind of, women and witches and so on and so forth. I found in Ireland you have the white woman. So there is witch trials in Kilkenny with Alice Kettler and stuff, but for the most part, women to do with herbalists and stuff are very much a part of the societies. I know there's a few examples of that in Slavic culture and German culture and stuff, but you can definitely get a lot of it in Ireland, where people will go out specifically to find the white woman, as they were referring to them, and get kind of blessed flowers and branches and all this stuff that she's specifically blessed and stuff, and then bring that into the home and stuff. But there's also a level of mischief with the whole fairy folk idea, the kind of these invisible demons, as they're referred to in Saint Columba,
Mm,
where you can get ill and sick. So some things, some magical herbs and stuff was there to kind of get rid of illnesses and stuff, and other stuff, anything that was connected to the fairy folk and stuff, could bring illness into the home. So mostly once again, it goes back to the fact that, like, sometimes the fairy folk can be good, sometimes they can be mischief and evil. This is
mm.
definitely a time where you get a lot of mischief and evil, and this whole thing of illness. Suddenly, if it's not cleansed, it'll make you sick. So we see a lot of that, and you also see a lot of this whole idea of herbalism and stuff as well. This constant thing of, bring the priest over to clean the house, bring the white woman over to clean the house. We need to have it cleansed of these quote unquote demons. And I think it goes back to what you can see in St. Columba's tales as well, where people bring buckets to St. Columba to bless it. And
Right.
when he blesses it, the demon runs away from the water, and he can drink the water and not get sick. So I think it revolves around that whole thing of clean the house, have these
Which,
fires up.
which makes me wonder what he was doing to those buckets of water, because
Yeah.
God knows, depending on where they got that water, it could have been, from a sedentary patch of, mud puddle or something. And maybe he actually did something to it to actually remove the bad microbiota in it.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's definitely worth reading it. It's St. Columba's literally it's on the definitely top reads and stuff, and it covers that of the bucket and stuff. Also, on top of that as well, is that May Day will also be the day when you have the over kings will go around and collect their taxes and stuff, which is handy
Um,
because we have our assemblies. So at the assemblies, just before you send them off the pasture and stuff, if you live out in the countryside, the king will go through the cattle, he'll go through the butter tribute, he'll go through your cost and stuff. So obviously, as I was saying before, in the early medieval period, this would have happened at assembly area, just like we see here. Boom, 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 boom. So you would have had the assembly area here, where you have had your bonfire and stuff.
uh,
When we enter into
right.
the late medieval period, the majority of these assemblies, not all of them, but a lot of them, are now happening up in the tower houses and stuff. So just outside the tower house, You would have brought all of your cattle and various other bits and bobs that you have shown tribute to your overking, that this is your property, you can count them up.
Right.
And then obviously he would have distributed it back out to the society. If you lived out in the city areas, you paid in the late medieval period, in the early medieval period, it was a tribute where you would come up with your silver and stuff and giving it to the king. And then in the late medieval period, it was known as the Black Rent. And that's where you would have had the officials from the cities and stuff. They mostly wouldn't have gone to the assemblies. In fact, the Overking would have gone to the city areas to collect his black rent. He would have raised his retinues up, or his mercenaries, gone over to the gates of the city or inside as well, and collected his black rent before returning to the assembly here. And from there, once all the counting up and stuff and all that has been squared away, then the cattle would be sent off to pasture out in the rough terrain, where they could be stolen by rival clans, or early on by rival Tuat groups, rival war bands, etc., etc. Then once all that's been done, of course, it goes into the whole celebrations. They would celebrate by playing hurling, instead of obviously being a bunch of French people trying to joust each other. The Irish would in fact play games of hurling. They would have play music and play various festival elements. So I reckon they would have done, traditional stuff like the harp and the bagpipes and all that stuff would have been played. And you would have had a real coming together at this period and stuff.
I see you mentioned recruiting fairs. So in France in May, they also had May fairs. And these were big merchant fairs. This was how people actually got goods from foreign places. But that's sort of that's like the 12th through 14th century, kind of before the Black Death. But they were specifically tied in with May Day and with, the celebrations of May. And you talked about the rents. I read the Count of Champagne. Champagne was known for its fabric fair, not for its carbonated wine in the Middle Ages. And apparently the Count was actually, so the fairs were so big that the people in the town of Troyes would actually rent their homes out to the merchants for lodging. And the Count actually demanded half of the income from those rents, those lodging rents, as kind of his cut of the deal for allowing them to have this fair, because part of the deal with having the fair was that he would personally provide protection for the merchants so they could travel safely to this May Day fair. So, that kind of all ties in with this idea that, yeah, we want to be out there, but it's not safe. So
yeah, I could actually imagine that as well, especially since the retinue were here. Like, the retinue are busy, like at least during the winter months, the retinue are pretty much in the settlements, so they can keep an eye on the cattle, so on and so forth. Once these summer months are on, like, the retinue are busy. They're getting involved, as you said there, with protection. I remember, who was it? Edward Davids, one of the top professors in University College Cork, was calling it a protection racket.
Protection racket, nice.
You'd have the king who'd have his protection racket up and going, and then send off the retinue and also the mercenaries like the McSweeney's and the McDonald's and stuff, who would get the contracts and all that sorted. Especially now, since the cattle are going out, the cattle are obviously going to need protecting and stuff. And you have all these farmers that need their cattle protected, so it's going to cost them, rent and so on and so forth. So it's a funny little racket going on here for sure. What else was I supposed to put in that one? Because you just reminded me of something. Hiring fairs, we just talked about that one. Yeah, I think I covered everything. So as I was saying there earlier as well, the whole movement as we're going from, this is obviously a modern day picture of the cow being brought up to the priest or member of the clergy and being blessed. So we do have that conversion from the old folklore ways into Christianity. And it's not a case of, Christianity outright stealing it. It's the fact that they actually solidly believe that this keeps away whatever's causing the cows to get sick.
Right.
So that's quite interesting as well. Obviously then, when we get up to the 18th to 19th century in Ireland, because you have the rise of this wasn't just happening with the Protestants as well. So you had the Protestants and the Church of Ireland, which was trying to remove Beltane, and they were trying to replace it with their holiday and festivals and stuff. But the Roman Catholic Church, going into the period of the famine and so on and so forth, actually believed that Beltane and various other festivals in Ireland were all pagan festivals. And I remember it was my grandmother told my mother that St. Bridget, St. Bridget's in hell. The priest told my mother that St. Bridget was in hell. And she told my mother. And,
What?
yeah, the St. Bridget was in hell. And
Oh my
my mom
God.
was like, so why is St. Bridget in hell? Well, they found out in the 20th century that St. Bridget isn't actually recognized as a saint according to the Roman Catholic Church. I think it's only recently that she got recognized as a saint, and that's the Irish St. Bridget, although she's insanely
Right.
famous in Ireland. She's actually a pagan god. This is what they came up with in the
Right.
19th century, and therefore she's in hell. So you had people in the Roman Catholic Church who, if they couldn't identify these people inside of the actual Rome, actually recognized solidly as a Christian saint, then they must be connected to some kind of pagan past, and therefore they must be in hell. So you have a lot of this kind of shutting down and being not allowing a lot of these faints and stuff. So Beltane starts to get suppressed in Ireland until very recently. So it's very recently, obviously, with the rise of the likes of neo-paganism, the rise of yourself there, Rachel, and myself, and reenactment, and various other things that's starting to bring up Beltane again. So Beltane is kind of, for some funny reason, has kind of fallen away stride from the church, which is funny because the church had played such an active role for years within Beltane of coming down and being a part of the wider
Right.
society of Ireland, with people who believe in this kind of folklore and blessing the cattle and being a part of the society, that now the church has kind of disconnected itself from the society of today in 2025. And of course, there's other things as well that's kind of very much disconnected the modern church away from Beltane. So we've kind of gotten to a period where we have the resurgence and this kind of picking up again of the Beltane festival inside of
Mm.
Ireland. Since 2009, people have brought back the festival, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger inside of Ireland. I have a lot of friends that go to Beltane festivals in Ireland, and hopefully it'll continue going. But it's very strange that by the time we get to the 19th, 20th century, the church kind of cuts itself completely away in Ireland, away from Beltane, which is quite funny. So
Yeah,
that's pretty much me.
it is curious because, it's these things can both be true. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny because medieval Florence would light bonfires to pretty much celebrate anything. Like if they had a if they had a victory over a rival city state, they would light bonfires throughout the city, right? There is any excuse to light crap on fire, right? So why do we have to label it? Why
Mm.
why does it? Oh, well, that's a bonfire. That's a pagan practice. We're going to light our nice little candles instead. I mean, I'm Catholic, so I can make fun of my own church.
Oh yeah.
Um, so, it's like, why can't we also? I mean, there's the Easter bonfires, right? Like that used to be a thing. I don't know if I guess it's maybe not a modern practice, but
Mm.
medieval, they had bonfires at Easter, and bonfire comes from word bone. Like that's literally they used to, burn bones. So,
Mm.
um, yeah. It's so did in your explorations, did you find any reference about special clothing or,
I couldn't
people?
find, for me personally, you see the thing is I wasn't looking for any special clothing per se. So I didn't aim to find anything. Obviously, the only thing I was eyeing up was the likes of what the Gallo Glass were wearing and the curtains and stuff, because I was looking at it from a military perspective. But I wasn't looking at it from any greens or anything, or if like, because straight away the only thing I can trigger there is what they were taking from the white women. If we pop over to the white women, where's she gone? She was there a second ago. There we go. That was the only thing I could really connect. But when it came down to clothing and wearing the Pacific green, I think it was because I didn't come across anything like that. But I could easily imagine if the Welsh, because in that photo you have of the Welshman, he's wearing green. Bum, bum, bum. So if they're doing it in Wales, I can definitely 100% imagine that they are doing it in Ireland as well, to be quite honest
Yeah,
with
he
you.
is wearing green. Look at that. You're right. Yeah. It's yeah, so I just it's it's funny because I didn't set out looking for clothing.
Mm,
Like everything I was reading about Maying and in the rest of Europe, it's like clothing and wreaths and like people, it's all about the trappings of the season, right? Was a
mm.
really the biggest aspect of it. So I didn't go looking for it, it found me.
Yeah, isn't that always the
But
way?
actually, because I've also, wandered down the path of medieval Irish clothing, and it frankly doesn't surprise me that that information might not be prevalent. Honestly, I don't even know if it still exists,
Mm,
that level of detail. It's, as we've discussed, lots of information got lost
but
in the 20s.
yeah,
So,
but now that you
um,
do highlight it, and I can see it in the Welsh fella, to be completely honest with you, I do believe we could find, if we went poking and prodding, we could probably find evidence of, like, how early were they wearing green?
yeah, so I mean, that's just, there's the earliest, I mean, just possibly the earliest piece of evidence here is this Welsh manuscript.
Mm,
Um, but in the 13th century is the earliest I can document it. Now, granted, I wasn't going back to see how far I could trace these practices because I'm immortal and I only have so many hours in my life.
mm,
So I couldn't tell you what the earliest documented reference. The Romans celebrated of, Floralia and this time of year, of course, but there was no mention of any particular colors being associated with it, just
mm.
the wearing of garlands and flowers. So, I'm not certain when green actually became the color of choice in various parts of Europe, but by the 14th century at the latest, it seems to have established itself in most
Mm.
places.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. So I'm gonna go with this one being the earliest, just because yeah, it's a funny one. Yeah, I'm gonna go with this. I'm running with this. I'm gonna say they all had green in the 12th century. There you go. There, I found my evidence.
We've committed.
I also reckon
Let us
he
know in the comments if you have other information.
and while we're at it,
Plug for
if you
engagement.
guys have any more questions there, because that's pretty much my presentation done. If you guys have any more questions for myself and Rachel about the whole presentation or anything in general around Beltane and stuff, definitely don't hesitate to ask, because we'll be tidying it up here. And if anybody's wondering, this image is from late medieval Ireland. It's done by Sean, who's done a good few of the. He's given me full permission. I asked him one day if I could use all these photos, and he was like, "Oh yeah, thumbs up, absolutely no problems." So this is one of Sean's works here of a cattle raid during the late medieval period in Ireland. Absolutely class photo, one of my favorites. And it pretty much shows here, there you can have the Gallowglass mercenaries here, or retinue, and then you have the kerns. So it's these guys here I was bitching about earlier, where you have these guys are also in the literature, in the early medieval literature, referred to as the Fenian war bands. In the actual literature itself, these guys are referred to as kerns, and they basically have, a lot of the time they take off all of their armor and stuff, just because it's a lot quicker and a lot more quiet, because you don't have the rustling of the chainmail while you're running. You might alert somebody or even scare the cattle, so they normally take all that stuff up and they would just have their bare weapons. And so here the kerns are actually trying to move the cattle while under the protection of the Gallowglass, who also, they could either be mercenary Gallowglass or they can be retinue Gallowglass, and they're there making sure nobody attacks these kerns while they're trying to move the cattle out of the area and easily open, so someone else will quickly come in soon to protect their cattle. So you might get, but there's burning in the background, so they probably burned. They probably got into a fight up in the hill there and probably won, and now
I
they're trying
just
to steal the
noticed that.
cattle.
I'm like, oh, some like house or settlement is on fire back there.
Yeah. So they probably already had the skirmish and the fighting, and now they're trying to go after their prize. That's probably why the Gallowglass here and the retinue are so chilled out. Probably tired from the
Oh,
fighting.
the
Uh,
protection racket. Fantastic.
oh, that's it. That's what it's all about. And this is obviously a picture of Bunratty Castle, which is under the O'Briens, who were also under the Fitzgeralds at the time of the construction of this in the 15th century. So that's Bunratty Castle there. Absolutely magnificent castle. Absolutely one of my favourites in Ireland. Bum, 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 bum. So if we don't have any more questions, we might just finish it there.
Yeah.
Rachel, as always, thank you so much for coming onto the show today. And thank you for letting me use your Zoom as well. It's always way more handier than Discord. See how better this is? Way better.
Yeah, no, you're right. This went way smoother. Discord messes with us badly.
Oh yeah, but it's free. That's the problem, and it's also
This
run by certain people.
this went this oh well there is that too, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
this is definitely better. I was just looking at the comments. Unfortunately, everyone, the live chat was showing up really strangely for me. Like nothing would come through. I back out and come back in again, and then suddenly there's 10. So I'm sorry if we missed any of your questions.
Mm.
Um, it wasn't on purpose. I was watching, but YouTube's messing with me. So
I can't see any
apologize for
purpose questions in there. Mostly just people chatting amongst themselves, from what I can
yeah.
see.
Just that,
Um,
which is fine.
it's great for my algorithm. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Chat away, people. And yeah, so Champagne apparently was basically accidentally invented, as Caravaggio says, in the 17th century. So it's not
Oh,
even a medieval thing
oh.
at all, which is why Champagne was known for its fairs and its fabric, actually, its fabric fairs,
Mm, mm, mm.
rather than its wine in the Middle Ages. So interesting
Oh, wow.
tidbit.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming in. And of course, in the next few hours from now, tonight, if you're living in Ireland, I'm going to be covering a class on the rise of the Emer, and I'll be covering the economic golden age of Dublin during the medieval period, and also the very, very evil Overking, which was Donnchadh Dunn, who was an absolute horrible human being. So we'll be covering that over my channel, Patreon, tonight. So if you want to head on over to that one and definitely sign up, head on over to my Patreon. The class, if you want to support the channel, you give whatever you want really. But if you want to be on to the classes, it's about 20 quid a month. Definitely well worth it for the amount of information you could get a hold of. And other than that, guys, thank you so much, and Slán go Bye
Bye, everyone. Stay creative.